Does love have weight? True weight? In the sense of some physical, measurable force? If it does, Jan and Andre may have just seen it firsthand. Did love manifest Mrs. Angelus's dear departed husband? Or was it just the delusion of a sick senior? This week, Jan and Andre have a drink, while Tate continues his renewal of faith. I'm your narrator, Chad, and this is episode 10, chapter 14 of No Evil. Let's escape. The ride went down easy. They'd both returned to a semblance of comfortable conversation with one another. Andre used Jan's laptop to sort through the pictures he'd taken, then picked a few favorites and forwarded them on to the desk. Jan's apartment was small, but comfortably so. It was 2 rooms. Well, she admitted it was 1 bedroom with a living room kitchen and a good-sized bathroom. The bedroom was more modest, and her bed was in a corner against 2 walls. Her home office was also in the bedroom, and consisted of a small desk and a computer chair pushed into the opposite corner. Andre sat on the bed scrolling through web pages while, on the opposite side of the room, Jan typed on a noisy desktop computer. Man, how old is that thing? Do you have a time machine? How does it still work? It works because it has to, just like me. And yes, I do have a time machine. She turned around and gave him a look of mock malevolence. I'm almost done here. Did you send the pictures? Yep. Andre set the laptop aside and stood up from her bed. He eyed the bottle on the nightstand and picked it up. He was surprised to see rye was the only liquor Jan had in the house. He took her for a wine person. But he supposed a few weeks ago he would have been surprised to find any. She had seemed uptight. Her devotion to straight-laced professionalism was almost to a fault when he met her. Now he knew they had a common sense of humor, and he got the sense that professionalism was her shield. They both laughed as Jan put the finishing touches on the baby pageant story. The epic tale of one babe's stroll from uterus to stage. It's a masterpiece, Jan, Andre said, taking a swig from his glass. He grimaced. This stuff's pretty potent. Too much for you? Jan said. She downed her glass in a gulp. I was raised on the rye. Seems a bit alcoholic-y, no? Andre said, as he sat back on the edge of the bed. Not at all. My family was close. Both my mom and dad worked in journalism. Whenever they got stressed, they'd sit down, have a glass of rye, and just talk things out. She looked into the ice in her empty glass before extending it out to Andre, who filled it without taking his eyes off of her. This was the most they'd spoken about her family. It wasn't harsh or an argument thing at all, just a discussion. And when it was done, it seemed like everything was okay, she said. When I was old enough, my dad used to do the same with me. My parents separated a few years ago. It was the job, I think. My mom moved to somewhere in Florida. Dad took a job out west. She again quickly downed the contents of her glass and held it out to Andre again. He filled it. She downed it. They never got drunk. They just had a glass and talked things out. I, however, need more than 1 glass, Jan said as she swirled clinking ice in the glass. Clearly, quipped Andre. Very funny. I still keep this bottle around, but I haven't really had anyone to share it with, she said. She stopped talking, took her eyes from the glass and focused on Andre. He offered her the bottle. She took it and set it aside on her computer desk. He was still sitting on the edge of her bed, and she stood and pushed Andre back by the shoulders. Andre's heart was pounding, and he felt a warm rush as she unzipped his pants. Are you sure? Andre said. I'm sure. She was beautiful. There was no doubt about that in Andre's mind. Her lips were soft and moist on his, and she rose up and threw off her shirt in one motion. Andre was hard now, so hard it almost hurt. He wanted her badly. They had been getting closer, and she was the only person on his mind most days. Now that it was happening, flashes of a man with his eyes burned out infiltrated his dream. He pushed them away. Andre sat up, unhooked her bra, and swung her around on her back. He stood and took off his shirt and pants. Jan rolled her jeans over her hips and down her long, slender legs. Neither of them noticed Andre spilled rye on the floor until the next morning. Tate didn't think he'd ever be able to console Sierra, but he took it upon himself anyway. First, he tried to speak to her, but every time he did, she started sobbing, heavy, whooping, high-pitched sobs. When he realized he was making things worse, he sat across from her silently. Then he moved the chair closer and offered her a tissue, which she accepted with a polite nod. Jeff had done nothing but stare at the cubicle wall for an hour or more, so he wasn't any help. Every now and then he'd mumble something, look at Tate, and go back to staring. Tate couldn't take it anymore. He needed to get out. He looked at the clock, questioning whether his shift was done. It was 1:15. His shift was over. It was then that Tate smiled at the preposterousness of closing out his shift regardless of what had happened.
Now that's circus. Whoops.
Tate hadn't meant to push the thought, but it blasted out of him loudly. Jeff and Sierra looked at him, Jeff's head cocked to the side, and Sierra about to begin sobbing again.
It's time to go.
Go? Go where? I'm not fucking going anywhere with you, freak, Jeff said. Jeff pushed to his feet, and Sierra rose instinctively and moved to his side. He balled up his fists and flexed his chest, but he was shaking. His eyes looked tired and worried, and his face wan. He raised one hand, palm out towards Tate. Just let us go. I don't know what the fuck you are, but if you just let us leave, you'll never see us again.
We have been chosen.
What? Chosen for what? Tate began to think of a way to describe it to them. While Tate didn't know either of them, he was willing to bet neither Jeff nor Sierra had spent much time in church. He was willing to bet neither of them had spent their childhood studying the Bible, dissecting it, turning the pages every day until the rough paper calloused their hands. They hadn't, but Tate had. He had a responsibility to show them their lives could be more. There was no need anymore to rest it on faith alone. He was proof. God, in all his glorious wisdom, had finally given them all a sign. He was up there watching, and Tate had a feeling he wasn't there to smile and kiss babies. Jeff lowered his hand and then moved it across Sierra's midsection, signaling her to move. He began to shuffle backward, never taking his eyes from Tate's. Just let us go, O'Byrne, he said. Simple.
No.
Tate raised one finger, perpendicular to the floor. He pushed one word.
Wait.
Tate slid into his chair, rolled to his computer, and began to type. The words came easily. He didn't know if either of them would respond well to it, but he printed what he'd written and grabbed it from the printer. He held it out to Jeff hesitantly. If there was any chance to explain things to them, it was now. If they were allowed to leave now, no doubt the police, maybe even the media, would get involved. Tate couldn't take that chance, not when they played such a critical role. Jesus had his apostles, his 12 closest followers who lived with him and absorbed his teachings. They were responsible for spreading his message. They were the ones who were able to share stories and convince people the word was divine. Tate hoped the same for Jeff and Sierra. If they believed, others would surely follow him. They'd seen his power. Tate was surprised they hadn't tried to flee and took it as a positive sign. Jeff took the page gingerly out of Tate's outstretched hand and looked over it quickly, his drunken eyes scanning right to left, then bottom to top. What the hell is this?
Read.
They sat staring at each other for a moment after Jeff finished reading. Tate finally turned and began to pace. He draped a hand across his stubbly chin and stroked it. He heard Jeff clear his throat. This can't be possible. We have to, I don't know, call someone or something. This is Jesus. This is
divine.
I don't know.
I do.
Listen, you little rat. Just because you got some weird mojo now doesn't...
Don't you swear!
Tate's rage took control, and he lost the thought. Sierra and Jeff fell to their knees and covered their ears. It didn't help. The sound was piercing, and painful pressure developed behind their eyes. Tate took a deep breath and focused again. He had to focus to push.
We're leaving now.
Where will we go? Jeff said.
Home.
Both Jeff and Sierra headed for the door immediately. Tate took one last look around. It didn't seem likely he'd be back. Tech care didn't matter now, if it ever did. Still, it seemed somehow gauche to leave without a word. He snatched a bright red marker from a cup on his desk, then a roll of tape from his drawer. On his way out the door, he grabbed a sheet of paper from the printer. Jeff and Sierra watched from the foyer as Tate scribbled something on the page. He sat the marker down on a filing cabinet, but it rolled off. Tate went to catch it, but his hand missed completely. The marker turned at a 90-degree angle mid-fall and placed itself in his hand. It looked like a magnet controlling a paper clip. Jeff and Sierra shared a quick look of concern, Tate looked for a moment at the marker in his hand, then put it in his pocket. He stared at his own palms as if they belonged to someone else. Then he walked toward Jeff and Sierra, closed the office door, and stuck the paper to the window. There were just 2 words. Gone preachin'. Tate walked out without bothering to lock up. The 3 of them piled into his modest silver sedan. The windows were covered with a layer of light, fluffy snow. He brushed it off without any trouble and then got in, fired the engine, and started out. The snow was still falling, albeit extremely lightly, and Tate took his time. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees and the windows fogged quickly. But, as Tate attempted to mime to them, the heater was notoriously hot. It was a long drive, and soon it was toasty. Could you turn the heat down a bit?" Jeff asked. Tate was surprised at the suggestion. Both Jeff's and Sierra's clothes were burned so that they were little more than tatters. They hadn't seemed to notice. Regardless, he obliged without speaking, without pushing. "Thanks," he said. Tate took one hand from the wheel, then leaned into the back seat with it. Sierra saw him reaching and pulled her tattered shirt together. Tate felt her leg, then realized he was reaching to the wrong side. He briefly put both hands back on the wheel, correcting for a bend in the road, then stretched his arm behind himself as far as he could. He felt a blanket, then pulled it toward Sierra.
Cover up.
The sedan rattled steadily as Tate navigated down a narrow gravel lane. Tall trees, pine, spruce, and maple lined either side. It was just slightly wider than an ATV trail, and in particularly bushy spots the tree limbs swatted at the side of the car. Sporadically they'd hear a thump followed by a long scraping sound the length of the vehicle. "Where are you taking us?"
Home.
Tate was indeed taking them to his home. The lane was really just an unopened road allowance unmaintained by the rural municipality. A new named road had been constructed on the opposite side of the property, but Tate preferred to use this side for the sake of privacy. The lane took a slight bend to the left at the end, and then opened into a widened area. For the last half kilometer or so, the woods seemed to recede from the sides of the car, and the state of the gravel road improved. Then out of the window Jeff could see a wooden fence. The aged wood looked nearly gray with decaying moss, and the rails were warped. Jeff couldn't tell whether they were warped by time or if they'd been installed that way, but he guessed the latter. The fence seemed to line the entire length of the property, although Jeff couldn't see any further than the sedan's dull headlights. Finally, the road widened further, and Tate pulled the car up to a gate, shifted the car into park, and shut off the engine. He opened the door and motioned to Jeff and Sierra to follow. Tate lifted the latch on the gate, and it shook like it would fall apart. He waved them through, set it gently back into place, and then followed them up the path leading to the house. "You live here?" Jeff said. The outside of the house was surrounded with rusty scrap metal, and for a moment Jeff was certain he was going to die there. A light clicked on in the front of the house and flooded the yard. The scrap metal had seemed to be dumped in slipshod piles, but when Jeff got closer he realized the piles were welded together. He squinted at one in the harsh light and discovered it wasn't a pile at all. The rusted outside metal had been fabricated into a wire frame in the shape of a human skull. Rusted teeth grinned at him.
Art. My art.
Jeff turned to see Tate smiling. He motioned to something half-cloaked in an unlit corner. It was a considerably less terrifying work of the same type, scrap metal formed over mesh, this time in the shape of a turtle. Tate waved his hand in the corner and another light clicked on, illuminating the entire front of the building. The house was something a real estate agent might describe as cozy. In realty, homes were always cozy, but in reality, houses were just small. The outside was slatted with dirty white siding. There were 2 windows at the front on either side of the door and one above it. From their vantage point, the second-floor window was obscured partially by the roof extending over a narrow porch. 4 pillars held it up. Inside it was much nicer than expected. The floors were polished hardwood, and the walls were crisp white. There was really only one room. One half served as a dining area and kitchen, and the other half had a couch, a coffee table, and a hefty-looking television in one corner. The other corner had an easel and paints, a workbench covered in a loose assortment of tools, and a vise. Jeff and Sierra stood awkwardly in the doorway. Tate moved to the couch, pulled off the cushions, and then yanked the bar inside, folding it out into a bed. From a closet under the stairs, Tate fetched a pillow and a blanket and handed them to Jeff. Tate was exhausted, and he trudged up the stairs to his bedroom.
Rest. Talk tomorrow.
Sierra made sure Tate was out of sight before she leaned into Jeff's ear. The stairs croaked deeply with each step. The croaks stopped, and she heard the floor settle under the footsteps above her.
What are we going to do?
I don't know. You've seen what he can do. What if he's right?
There's no way. He gives me the creeps. It's all some trick.
I'm tired. You're tired. There's nothing we can do tonight. Just sleep now and we'll be able to think clearer in the morning. Jeff looked contemplative. He wiped his face in both hands and sat on the edge of the bed. Sierra followed to the bedside but didn't sit down. He didn't look at her.
Are you seriously considering this? This guy thinks he's a god or something. It's impossible,
she said. Then how? How could he possibly do it? When he speaks my own thoughts, they're gone. And it's all I can hear. Isn't it the same for you?
Yes, but...
Look, if we wake up tomorrow and you still feel like it's all been a bad acid trip, we'll just go talk to the cops. In truth, Jeff didn't want to. He had sat thinking in mostly silence for the last couple of hours. When he was young, his mother had been a fierce churchgoer. He'd always rebelled against it, but now it all made sense. She was trying to save him because, even without proof, she believed there was something there. All the time she told him he should get his act together, all those preachers on TV talking about the end times, maybe they were right. Maybe this was Armageddon, and this was how it would all end. Jeff wanted to be on the right side if that was the case. He eased back into the pillow, holding the thought in his mind, until the screeching sound of rusted metal woke him. That's all for episode 10, chapter 14 of No Evil. If you're enjoying the podcast, let us know what you think in the comments. Give us a like, a share, a thread. Do all the social media things. Become an escapist by subscribing and clicking the bell. And you know what else you could do? You could borrow your nephew's speaking spell to fool a buddy who borrowed your laptop to write a script for a proposed pilot about a zookeeper who travels to Peru, but he dripped hot cheese in the fan and now you can't rev the thing up without it sputtering up noxious nachos. No, don't do that. Just watch AV Escapes. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the next escape.